The night my daughter got married, my ex-wife leaned over to me during the reception and whispered, "You know, if it weren't for me, you'd still be nobody." A retired mailman with a bad knee in a studio apartment. She said it with a smile, like it was a compliment wrapped in the knife. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my glass of iced tea and watched my daughter spin on the dance floor with her new husband. And I thought, she has no idea what she's looking at. That was 8 months ago, and I'd been thinking about that moment ever since. Let me back up. I spent 32 years working for the U.S. Postal Service out of a distribution center in Akron, Ohio. Carrier, then supervisor, then operations coordinator. It wasn't glamorous work. My feet hurt most mornings. My back gave me trouble after a car clipped me on a route in 2003. But I showed up. Every single day I showed up. My ex-wife, I'll call her my ex-wife because that's what she is, married me when I was 26 and she was 24. She was sharp, ambitious. The kind of woman who had a 5-year plan written in a notebook before notebooks were fashionable. I admired that about her. For a long time, I genuinely admired it. We had our daughter together. One child. She was born in the middle of February during a snowstorm so bad they almost couldn't get my ex-wife to the hospital in time. I drove 30 miles an hour on the highway with my hazards on, gripping that steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Our daughter came out screaming and healthy and perfect, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my mother's funeral. For a while, we were good, not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but good. We bought a small house in a suburb of Akron. 2 bedrooms, a garage that leaked when it rained, a backyard big enough for a kiddie pool. My ex-wife worked in hospital administration and moved up steadily. I worked my route and then worked my way into management. We were, by any reasonable measure, a working-class family doing fine. The trouble started when fine stopped being enough for her. I don't say that bitterly. I've had enough years to understand it. She wanted more money, more status, a bigger house, a different zip code. She started looking at me like I was a draft she'd written before she knew how to write. Something early, something she'd grown past. By the time our daughter was in middle school, my ex-wife had stopped calling me by my name at home. It was always you or him when she was talking to our daughter about me. Small thing. But those small things add up. When our daughter was 15, my ex-wife told me she wanted a divorce. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had 1,000 breakfasts, where our daughter had done her homework for years, and listening to my ex-wife explain, in clear and organized sentences, why our marriage was over. She had thought it through. She had already spoken to a lawyer. She was ready. I was not ready. But I signed the papers. I got a fair deal, I think. Split the equity on the house. Shared custody of our daughter, no alimony because we both worked. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away. I took my recliner, my tools, and about 40 boxes of books I'd collected over the years. What I didn't know, what I didn't find out until much later, was what my ex-wife was saying about me after I left. She told people I'd been financially irresponsible, that we'd struggled because of my poor decisions. She told her friends, her co-workers, her new boyfriend, and eventually our daughter's circle, the parents of her school friends, that she had been the one holding everything together, that I'd been a weight she'd had to carry. Our daughter was 17 when she came to me and said quietly, "Dad, people are saying you were bad with money." I asked her who was saying it. She didn't answer, but I knew. I want to be very clear about something. I did not argue with my ex-wife in front of our daughter. Not once. Not a single time after the divorce did I try to turn my daughter against her mother or defend myself by attacking the woman she still loved. I made that decision early and I kept it, even when it hurt. And it did hurt. Because the story that was spreading wasn't true. We had been fine financially. We had a modest savings account. I had a pension through the Postal Service. I had never gambled, never spent recklessly, never hidden money or wasted it. But nobody was asking me. They were just hearing her version. And her version was built to make her look strong and me look small. After the divorce, I kept working. I got promoted one more time before I retired at 62. I've been putting money away for decades. Not a lot each month, but steadily the way you do when you grow up without much, and you know what it feels like to need something you can't afford. I had my pension. I had my 401k. I had some money in a simple index fund my brother had talked me into back in the 90s. About 3 years after I retired, I bought a house. Not a mansion. Not anything that would make the neighbors slow down and stare. But a real house. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a finished basement, a back porch that faces west so the sunsets are something worth seeing. I paid for it in cash. Every last dollar. I didn't tell anyone except my daughter and my brother. My daughter cried when I sent her the photos. She drove out to see it the weekend after I moved in and stood in the kitchen running her hand along the countertops and not saying anything for a long time. "Dad," she finally said. "I know," I said. "You did all this quietly." "Didn't seem like there was anything to announce," I told her. She hugged me in the kitchen for a long time. She smelled like her shampoo, the same kind she'd used since high school. I held on. That was 2 years before her wedding. The wedding was held at a venue about 40 minutes outside of Columbus, a converted barn with good lighting and long wooden tables and a cocktail hour on the lawn. My daughter had spent a year planning it. Her husband is a good man, a physical therapist who grew up in Cincinnati and calls me Sarah, even though I've told him at least a dozen times he doesn't have to. I like him. My ex-wife was there, of course. We were civil. We have always been civil in public, in a way that two people can be civil when they've learned that pretending is less exhausting than fighting. But during the cocktail hour, she pulled me aside near the bar and made that comment. "You know, if it weren't for me, you'd still be nobody." A retired mailman with a bad knee in a studio apartment. Smiled when she said it, like she was reminding me of something I'd forgotten. I looked at her for a moment. She was dressed well, hair done, the same confident posture she'd always had. She'd remarried a few years earlier. A man with a good income, a big house in Westlake, the kind of life she'd been planning when we were still married. Good for her. I meant that. I just said, "Enjoy the wedding," and walked back toward my daughter. I didn't tell my daughter what her mother had said. Wasn't the day for it. But I thought about it on the drive home. I thought about it for weeks. Not with anger exactly. More like a quiet kind of clarity. She still believed it. After everything, after all the years, all the work, all the things I'd built in the silence she thought was emptiness, she still believed the story she'd been telling. I decided sometime around November that I was going to invite her to see the house. Now I know how that sounds. I read enough to know what people say about that kind of thing. That it's petty. That I should be over it. That the only person I need to prove anything to is myself. And maybe they're right. But I'm 64 years old and I'm past pretending I don't have feelings. I wanted her to see it. Not to humiliate her. Not to gloat. I just wanted her to know the story she'd been telling wasn't the whole story. Maybe not even the true story at all. I texted her in late November. I said our daughter had mentioned she was going to be in the area visiting a friend, and I thought it might be a good opportunity for her to stop by and see where I'd settled. Kept it casual. Neighborly, almost. She texted back after about a day. Said she could stop by on a Saturday afternoon. I made coffee. I cleaned the house, though it didn't need much. I keep it tidy. I sat on the back porch that morning watching the frost on the grass melt as the sun came up, and I thought about the studio apartment comment. The bad knee comment, and then I stopped thinking about it because there was nothing more to figure out. She arrived at 1 o'clock. I heard her car in the driveway. She drives a silver SUV, and I opened the front door before she knocked. She stood at the end of the front walk and looked at the house. Just stood there for a moment. The house is a colonial, white with black shutters, big oak tree in the front yard that drops acorns in October. Nothing flashy, but it's solid. You can see it's solid just by looking at it. She walked up the path, slowly. "This is yours?" she said. "Come on in," I said. She stepped inside, and I watched her take it in. The hardwood floors I'd had refinished. The built-in bookshelves in the living room full of all those books I'd moved in. 40 boxes. The kitchen with its good appliances and the window over the sink that looks out into the backyard where I'd planted a small vegetable garden the previous spring. She walked from room to room the way people do when they're trying to rearrange something in their minds. I poured coffee and we sat at the kitchen table. She was quiet for longer than I expected. She looked at her cup. Then she looked around the kitchen again, slowly, like she was checking whether something had changed while she wasn't looking. "When did you?" she started. 3 years ago, I said. "Paid cash." She nodded, didn't say anything. I didn't press. There wasn't anything to press. I hadn't invited her over to make a speech. I hadn't prepared remarks. The house said what I wanted to say. We talked for about an hour. About our daughter, mostly. About her new job promotion, about the trip she and her husband were planning to Portugal. About a minor thing with her husband's family that my ex-wife seemed to have opinions about. Normal conversation. The kind two people have when they've known each other for decades and learned to navigate around the edges of old pain. Before she left, she stood in the front doorway and looked back into the living room one more time. "You've done well, Norman," she said. That was it. Not an apology, not an admission. Just those 4 words. I said, "Take care of yourself." And she walked down the front path to her silver SUV and drove away. I stood in the doorway for a minute after she left. The oak tree was bare. November bare. All the acorns long gone. The street was quiet, the way streets in good neighborhoods are quiet on Saturday afternoons. I could hear the heat running inside the house behind me. I thought about the kitchen table where she'd told me the marriage was over. I thought about the apartment with the leaky bathroom faucet I'd lived in for 2 years before I found something better. I thought about my daughter running her hand along these countertops and not saying anything. I thought about 32 winters of loading up for roots in the dark, of watching my knee swell up and icing it down and going back out anyway. The comment at the wedding, "Nobody, a retired mailman, a bad knee," had been meant to remind me of my limits, to put a frame around me that kept me small. But the thing about working quietly for a long time is that eventually the work becomes its own answer. You don't have to argue with the frame. You just build something outside it, and one day the person who built the frame comes to your door and sees with their own eyes that their measurements were wrong. I went back inside, closed the door. Put on a record. I've been collecting vinyl since the 70s, and the record player is one of the first things I set up in every place I've ever lived. An old Chet Baker album. Soft trumpet. The kind of music that sounds like late afternoon even when it's late afternoon. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat in my recliner by the bookshelves, and outside the window the November light was doing what November light does in Ohio. Going gold and then going fast. I was not a nobody. I had never been a nobody. I was a man who'd shown up, who had raised a good daughter, who had saved his money and kept his word and built, quietly and without applause, a life that was entirely and completely his. That had always been true. It just took her seeing the house to know it too. I'd been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what it actually means. Not the house, not her face when she walked through the door. Something underneath all of that. What I keep coming back to is this. The way you live when nobody's watching is the only thing that's really yours. I worked those roots in the dark for 32 years. I iced my knee down on winter nights and went back out the next morning. I saved slowly, month after month, not because someone was keeping score, but because I believed, even when the belief was quiet and a little worn, that how you do the small things is how you do everything. That's not a lesson someone taught me in a classroom. It's something I learned by doing it wrong first, and then right again, until it became who I was. My ex-wife wasn't entirely wrong about the person I was early in our marriage. I was uncertain. I was still figuring out how to be steady. But she mistook uncertainty for smallness, and she never updated her opinion when the evidence changed. That's the trap of deciding too early what someone is worth. You stop looking. You carry around a version of them that stopped being true years ago, and you mistake your memory for the facts. What I tried to do, what I hope I did, was keep my character clean, even when it cost me something. I didn't turn my daughter against her mother. Not once. That wasn't weakness. That was a choice I made because I knew what kind of man I wanted to be. And I knew my daughter was watching even when she didn't know she was watching. Children learn what integrity looks like. Not from what you say, but from what you do when it would be easy to do otherwise. The fact that my daughter drove out to see the house and stood in my kitchen and cried. I think she wasn't just seeing the house. I think she was seeing 30 years of choices she'd observed without having words for them yet. And then there's the long game. The part nobody talks about much. The part where you just keep going. I didn't have a plan to end up somewhere that would surprise people. I had a plan to not waste what I earned, to not spend money I didn't have, to not make decisions from anger or pride. That kind of thinking doesn't make you interesting at a dinner party, but it compounds the way interest compounds, slowly and then faster, until one day you look around and realize you built something real. My brother used to say that a man's life is mostly invisible, that the important parts happen in the small decisions, the ones that don't make good stories until years later, if ever. He was right. The house wasn't the achievement. The house was just the part she could see. What she couldn't see, what she had never been able to see, was the discipline it took to keep showing up. The judgment it took to know what mattered and what didn't. The decency it took to stay quiet when speaking would have been easier, and to speak only when it served something larger than my own need to be right. Those things built the house, and those things I realized standing in the doorway watching her drive away are the only things worth building.